You're watching Unlocking the Vault on Mtgo Academy, featuring Enderfall.
Alright, hello everyone. This is a deck tech for this Esper Bomberman deck that I played in a daily event over the weekend. This deck is a fun and interesting deck to play. It is certainly not a broken deck. It's obviously not a deck that could win on turn 1 or turn 2 without any sort of disruption or anything like that. It is not a fair deck in the sense that it isn't just doing some regular, nothing really powerful. Is more of a control deck, even though it does have 9 creatures in the deck, and it does have sort of a combo-like finish to it. It's not a control combo deck like Oath of Druids, which is more like a combo control deck. This is more of a control combo deck, if that makes any sense. Anyway, the whole deck is really built around the Trinket Mage engine. It is a creature that is able to fetch out artifacts from your library that are cost 1 or 0 to cast. And what it can do is it acts as a toolbox that allows you to get a whole host of different things from your deck to kind of tutor for as you need them. So if you need to ramp, you can go and get one of the restricted artifact cards. Well, Mox Opal isn't restricted, but the rest of these are all restricted cards that allow you to ramp your mana. So if you're looking to generate some mana against, say, like a workshop deck or something, you could, by all means, you can go out and get a Sol Ring or a Mana Crypt or something along those lines, or even Black Lotus if you want to get one particular card out, like maybe something like a Jace or something along those lines. You need a real quick injection of mana. Black Lotus itself replaces it, basically. When you get Black Lotus with Trinket Mage, the mana basically gets replaced. The 3 mana that you spent on Trinket Mage can be then used to maybe play a second Trinket Mage out of your hand just to get a different artifact. Kind of in a way it works like Burning Tree Emissary in Standard right now, but obviously that's not necessarily going to be a super powerful play, but in certain game states that might be something you want to consider. But for the most part, you're going to want to look to get one of these 5 cards from this artifact package here. So obviously this is a Vault Key deck, so if you have Time Vault or a way to get Time Vault, you want to go and grab yourself a Voltaic Key. If you need to playing Dredge, you can go and get yourself a Nihil Spell Bomb. If you're playing against a bunch of creatures, you can go and grab yourself Engineered Explosives. If you just want to try and get some advantage in the Control Mirror Match, since this Divine Top is a great card to get, especially it's a great card if you want to, say, play a Trinket Mage on turn 1 on the play. If you have, say, a land and a Mana Crypt, or a land and 2 Moxes, you could go this and kind of just, it's not necessarily always the best idea. It depends on what else is in your hand, but going and get Sensei's Divine Top on turn 1 is a pretty strong play as well. So there's quite a few options that you can get, and that's one of the beautiful things about what this deck does. The second part of this deck, and where the deck kind of gets the namesake from, is from Auriok Salvagers. Now this is a card that, in combination with Trinket Mage, allows you to kind of search up and then recycle artifacts that go into the graveyard for 1 or less mana. And what you're really trying to do is get Black Lotus. With Black Lotus and a white and a colorless mana, you can fetch Black Lotus from your graveyard, put it into play, sacrifice it for 3 white mana, then use Auriok Salvager's ability, 1 white and one colorless to get the black colors back from the graveyard to put in your hand to put it back into play. Rinse and repeat. And each time you do that, you can generate 1 mana of any color. What you want to essentially do is do that a few times with white mana so that you can continue to activate Auric Salvager's ability, but then after that you can start adding blue or black mana as you need to do whatever else that you might want to do. Now there's a lot of different things that this deck can do with that combo, which I'll get to in a minute, but I want to just briefly touch on the rest of the creature package here. Snapcaster Mage obviously has a lot of beneficial applications in control decks. It allows you to cast Ancestral Recall a second time. Sometimes you can go back and get a piece of counter magic. It's just a great, valuable, flexible card. And what makes it really tick in this deck is that it's a wizard, which is also what Trinket Mage is, and what Auric Salvagers is. I'm sorry, Snapcaster Mage is a human, excuse me. Snapcaster Mage is a human, so is Trinket Mage, so is Auric Salvagers, and the last 2 cards here, Grand Abolisher, to play against control decks if for the turn that you want to go combo off, or just to land a key card like a Jace, or maybe Gifts and Given or something along those lines, or play your missing pieces Vault Key. And then Magus of the Future. Now this card, when I first saw it in deck lists, I was flabbergasted. So there's no way that card is actually good. The very first game I played with this, I cast about 8 or 9 spells with the Magus of the Future. It helped that I had played Yawgmoth's Will and had Jace the Mind Sculptor as well in play. But needless to say, I was hooked instantaneously the first time I played this card. It is quite the house. It is, if you're not casting more than 2 or 3 spells off of this in the turn that you play it, you probably did something wrong. It's not a game-ending combo piece. You can obviously get stuck with land on the top of your library, preventing you from being able to play anything else. But with fetch lands and other things like that, you should be able to generally be able to play whatever is on the top of your library. It's just absolutely amazing. So to kind of round that out, obviously what really makes the fact that those guys are all humans is that Cavern of the Souls kind of ties it all together. So it makes Trinket Mage, Auric Salvager, Snapcaster, Magus of the Future, and Grand Abolisher all uncounterable, which is really strong. I originally pulled this deck list from a tournament, paper tournament that I found. That deck played with 3 Cavern of Souls, but I thought that was a little too much. In the little bit of testing I did, I think I drew Cavern of Souls a little too often. I get the idea of having 3. It's a card that you want to draw, and you don't want to necessarily draw it twice in a game, but I was seeing it a lot more twice than I really wanted to. And you can't cast a lot of these other spells off of it, which makes things a little bit difficult. I mean, it's not the end of the world if you draw 2, obviously, but drawing 2 is bad. Drawing 3, which happened to me in one game, was brutal. And I think that was pretty much what sold me on getting rid of one of those and adding another land that taps for mana. But anyway, so the rest of the deck pretty much is made up of typical control elements. The deck has 8 counter spells, which is a little bit low for what you would consider a quote-unquote control deck. But this deck isn't really necessarily trying to win the game on the stack. This is a type of a control deck that just wants to win the game on the battlefield. So a lot of what you're using these counter spells is not for just stopping everything that they do. You have to strategically decide when to launch these countermeasures. So you either want to try and protect a key spell, like trying to play Time Vault or Voltaic or something like that, or stopping their absolutely broken play, like their turn 1 Necropotence or their turn 1 with Forbidden Orchard or the Druids, things that are just going to basically end the game if you don't stop them. And that's really what you're trying to do here. The original deck that I played, I believe, had 2 spell snares. I'm not a big fan of the spell snare having more than 1 spell snare. It's a great card to have, flexibility with. But I prefer a split of spell snare and spell pierce. Spell pierce obviously can it helps you in the early games when you're on the draw to counter their turn 2 spells. Or at least they're broken turn 2 spells, maybe tinker or whatnot. Late game it doesn't quite have the value, and it obviously can't stop creatures. But where it is really beneficial is that if I had, say, spell snare on turn 1 on the play, I'm stuck only being able to counter a 2 mana cost spell. So I could counter Oath of Druids, I could counter Stoneforge Mystic or Dark Confidant or something along those lines, but I'm limited to only 2 mana spells. And in Vintage, typically if they're going to cast a 2 mana spell, I'd say more often than not they're casting that on turn 1. So I mean where Spell Snare does get the advantage over in the late game is that it counters mana drain for 1 mana, which is really important. But beyond that, I think I like the applications of Spell Pierce a little bit more, but I certainly understand if somebody wants to mess around with the rest of the 4 counter spells here, or maybe add another if you want to take out something else. And 2 Mental Missteps are basically just protection for your 1 mana casting spells. So protecting Ancestral Recall, protecting Voltaic Key, or even protecting your 1 mana spells from the sideboard or whatnot. And the rest of this is your typical package of blue spells. Hurton's Recall is simply because there's such a large amount of workshop decks in the metagame, and it's pretty good in game 1, where they won't have Wishbane Worm. Not so great in turn 2, games 2 or 3. But then you've got Time Walk, Demonic Tutor, Yawgmoth's Will, Ancestral Recall, Brainstorm, Ponder, Gifts Ungiven. These are all restricted cards except for Hurton's Recall, obviously. They're powerful and you really want to have access to them. This deck has 2 Jace the Mind Sculptors. It is a great card, in the combo matchup, but it's not necessarily. This deck isn't really a Jace deck per se. This is sort of a Jace value deck. You're casting Jace to get some value off it. You're not. Although you can win the game with the Jace by himself, he's mostly just there to brainstorm at each and every turn, or bounce a creature. I mean, those are the 2 most common uses in this. Plussing him up to his ultimate is probably not what this deck really wants to do, but I'm sure it would be an appropriate choice in certain game states. And then I have a singleton Swords to Plowshares. There are enough creatures in the format to warrant wanting this in the main deck, but right now there are a ton of combo decks running around, and obviously Swords to Plowshares is pretty bad in them. So I have one in the main deck to tutor for, but I don't necessarily want more than one. I can see going to 2 in the main deck, but this deck is really tight in terms of what you want to do. So adding another Swords to Plowshares has to come at the expense of something that I feel is still kind of important. And nonetheless, it's even decent with in game 1. Where you can snap cast right back. So that's the main deck. Looking at the sideboard, it's a little bit of a hodgepodge of things that you've got going on here. The beautiful thing about Trinket Mage is that it has a decent game against Dredge. So you don't necessarily have to load your entire sideboard up with anti-Dredge cards. I've played the Dredge matchup a couple of times. I've been satisfied with the way things are. Obviously, you're kind of stuck with needing to draw Trinket Mage because you've only got 4 cards to fight them. And then another one in the main deck, you have a Nihil Spellbomb in the main deck, which I went over here. And even in a pinch, you could go get engineered explosives in game 1 to wipe out their zombie tokens or what have you. But nonetheless, it has enough tutoring elements. One of the beautiful things is with Trinket Mage, you can, if you can manage to cast this on turn 1 or turn 2, and you only have exactly 3 mana, you can go get yourself Tormod's Crypt. And Tormod's Crypt doesn't cost any mana. It gets around Cabal Therapy or Unmask, because you play that in the same turn, and you leave this on the battlefield, and it's just kind of a threat. And good Dredge players can sort of play around it. Not quite experienced Dredge players might not know exactly how to deal with a Tormod's Crypt that's sitting on the battlefield. So I've had mild success with it. This is an Esper deck, so I've got a Miser Notion Thief. It has never come up in any of the games where I've sideboarded it in, but it just seems like it's an absolute blowout in those games. It is a human, so it is uncounterable. So if you run up against a Storm deck with a lot of draw 7s in it, there isn't anything that it could possibly do, even if they were playing with counter magic. So it's an interesting card. I think it's got merits as a 1-up in the sideboard, as a complete absolute just straight up blowout. There is a ton of Storm decks running around, so I do have a couple of anti-storm measures here, or I should say 3. Aethersworn Canonist is also a human, so it is uncounterable as well. It prevents things from getting out of hand from your opponent. And then you've got the anti-storm cards themselves, Ironbeard Chap and Flusterstorm. Flusterstorm also has obviously the added flexibility of being good in the control mirror match. In the anti-workshop matches, there are a few cards we've got. We've got a Still Sabotage. This also works against Tinkerbots, and Hurgo's Recall and a Rebuild. Now, a lot of the workshop decks are playing Richbane Orb, which makes Hurgo's Recall impossible. So access to a Rebuild is kind of nice, because this does not target, and in the worst case scenario, it is a cycling card. The last 4 cards in the sideboard are some is basically like anti-oath measures. We have War Priest of Thune, which is an uncounterable effect where you can just knock off their Oath of Druids. Then you also have Disenchant, which will also work just fine in the workshop matchup. And then a couple of Swords of Plowshares for the creatures and fair decks. So that is the deck. It is. I have a blast playing it. I think it's pretty powerful. I don't think it's anything, near the best deck in the format, but it certainly is a fun deck, and it is certainly a viable deck. And so, if you're looking for something a little bit different to do, I totally recommend this deck.